welcome to another episode of SlatorPod on this momentous day when the United Kingdom is exiting the European Union. How are you over there, Esther, in London?
Yes, I'm good. Still here, surviving. I think as of tomorrow, we shall be outside of the European Union. Although, these things aren't over until they're over. So with the amount of changes and hold-ups and what have you, something could still happen last minute. Who knows? But probably not.
Probably not. And I'm not going to force you to talk politics here. There's a zillion other podcasts that are discussing this right now. So let's stay focused, razor focused on the language industry. Another super exciting week. We had a very large M&A transaction in the interpreting space that we're going to discuss. Also, a really interesting feature around localization from ASICS, a shoe company. And staying in London, staying in the UK, of course, we're building the agenda now for SlatorCon London, which we're going to run in early May 2020. We're not moving away from London. It's been great for us over the past 3 years. So really delighted that we can start announcing our first panelists and speakers. Typically, 3.5 months ahead of the conference, we're starting to feature the first speakers and panelists. So for our panel discussion on the day 2, on May 6th, we've confirmed with Quill Content CEO Ed Bussey, who's going to be part of our panel around trends creation, multilingual content creation, the really high level, high touch end of the localization industry. So that's going to be great. We also have Piotr Mistal. He's the partner at V4C. That's the private equity fund that invested in Summa Lingua, Polish LSP. That transaction was late last year, and we also confirmed with him he's going to speak about the language industry, the role of private equity in the language industry. And I'm also discussing with a very senior person around the keynote presentation. So that should be confirmed early next week. Anyway, we got the super early birds still alive today. So if you want to, get the ticket on super early bird pricing, make sure you head over to the website today, Friday, and get yours. So anybody listening to that today should head over today. Cool. So Esther, you've been very busy after our M&A report. Next project is the Language Service Provider Index. So tell us a bit more about that and what our listeners should know about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the LSPI 2020 is a work in progress at the moment. So we're building on the LSPI the index that we released in 2019, where we had around 70 LSPs featuring in the rankings. So we're expanding it this year a little bit to include some probably smaller players as well. So we're very keen to hear from people who are wanting to be featured in the LSPI. So few weeks still to get your revenues and various information across to us. People who are interested, we're obviously in contact with a lot of people already and waiting for a number of submissions. We've got quite a good number already. We're looking forward to receiving a bit more and putting together a longer list and index of the top LSPIs by revenue.
So how do we divide this, right? We got the super agencies, that's kind of the top record. Then we got the leaders and the challengers. Mm-hmm. So the ones that you're basically, for the super agencies and the leaders are probably in good shape. But then for the challengers, you're saying that, people that are, or LSPs that are interested in being featured there should reach out to you directly?
Yeah, I think so. So last year we had, I think the smallest size revenue was around $8 million US dollars, and that took us to around 70 or so LSPs. This year we are going to expand it. We've already had submissions from LSPs around the 1 and 2 million mark in dollars. Happy to hear from people really who are keen to be included on that side of things as well. And we have had some movement already, interestingly, within the other segments. So we've had a couple of the challengers from 2019 who've moved up into what we would classify as the leaders segment. So some movement on that as well. We're looking to obviously build on what we've done the past couple of years.
Yeah, this piece, it's freely accessible, so anybody can look at it. It's not behind any paywall. And it gets thousands and thousands of page views, so there's a lot of visibility for anybody who wants to participate in that. So, great. moving on, we ran a very interesting story this week around ASICS Digital, the digital arm of the footwear company, the shoe company ASICS, the Japanese footwear company. That was actually Marion Marking. She ran an email interview with Alessandra Binazzi, who is the director of localization at ASICS Digital. I love this article. It highlighted a lot of things, around NMT, around vendor sourcing, around TMS. But the two things I really want to discuss with you today are around centralized versus regionalized sourcing and using LSPs there. And then also on the TMS side, Alessandra, had a very interesting take on that, which I think is worth discussing. So on the sourcing side, there's always this kind of back and forth between should you appoint a global vendor and kind of have a one-stop shop and run everything through a single point of contact from the language services or localization services side, or should you really leave your units regionally to be able to work with regional vendors? So there's always this equation you have to balance. And Alessandra is of the opinion that you should really give the individual regions some leeway. You have
some autonomy to decide. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, some autonomy to decide. Yes, you're providing a centralized solution, but if if you have to be really agile or have to have something done in a very particular way, then she thinks that you should give autonomy to the individual regions. And that's actually I think it's an interesting approach by somebody on the buy side, because there's been a trend over the past 10-15 years definitely towards much more centralization and the center forcing the regions into global SLA service level agreements.
Through shared services or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, some of the smaller LSPs would lose business because, somewhere in at headquarters, somebody, won the global deal, and then they would pull the decision making power from the regions back. So it's interesting to see that, at least at ASICS, they appear to be a little more regionally focused as well.
Yeah.
And then you also...
I think that... Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's an interesting question, actually, and something just kind of occurred to me, which is, yes, we have the centralization, and yes, we have some global vendors benefiting, obviously, from some of these very large contracts. But I suppose what you do find then is that this is probably contributing to a lot more subcontracting, because actually, potentially, these same vendors that are working regionally or locally in the regions may well end up working for the clients through a larger LSP.
That makes of course that's a good point. And but if you're looking at it from a central procurement point of view, if you are a procurement manager that cycles in and out of certain what they call categories, one year you're sourcing chairs, the next year you're sourcing office materials, and then in the third year you're heading over into translation. Your key thing is risk, and you need a single point of contact. You like that this particular large LSP has like a giant insurance coverage, etc. So I guess
I can see that from the procurement side for sure. But if you're thinking about people who are actually responsible for localization, quality, who are using it and who care about it, even in the regions potentially, I suppose some of these local marketing managers who might be going rogue and using the smaller vendors potentially, or those who are not on the preferred vendor list, might be well aware that these smaller vendors are actually working for larger LSPs and working on their content anyway. So I get, but obviously it depends a little bit where your priorities lie, and obviously that's a function of what your role in the company is as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then let's talk about the TMS. That was also an interesting discussion. Actually, there was some comments on LinkedIn around that. So what's her take on TMS and LSP and one-stop shop?
Yeah, so I think Alessandra is saying that, TMS providers, standalone TMS providers, really a better place to provide TMS solutions for buyers. And I think the main rationale for that seems to be that then you are completely independent from LSP. So you're vendor agnostic. If you're using a provider who is only focused on TMS and is not providing services, you do have more freedom, in her view, to source and outsource to a variety of different LSPs or freelancers as you want. So you're not tied into one LSP. It makes a lot of sense, and I know that a lot of other people would share that view. And essentially, having a TMS allows you to manage a multi-vendor strategy quite effectively from inside the business. But then that said, I know that there are numerous LSPs who have their own TMS solutions who would say that buyers are not tied in to using their services. Even if they are using the TMS, it obviously opens them up to be able to use the service from the LSP, but then the buyer would also be free to onboard their own linguists or freelancers or use other LSPs. So I think there's definitely a mix that's going on there.
She even
What's your take on all of that?
She said what you just outlined, and then regardless of a provider's promise of supporting vendor neutrality. So she's like, yes, you might, LSP with a TMS offering, you may tell me that that you're vendor neutral, but at the end of the day, obviously you have a vested interest in, once you sold me the tech solution, to actually that I'm also using your services, right? So I mean, TMS obviously is arguably more embedded into a buyer organization than an LSP. It's harder to switch TMS providers potentially than it is to switch LSPs, I would argue. I mean, I don't really have any sort of moral opinions or what have you, one way or the other, whether it should come from an LSP or whether the TMS should be provided by a TMS provider. I mean, I think that there's arguments for and against, for sure. But on the TMS side, I would just go with whatever solution really fits the business. And if you are already working with a large LSP who happens to have a TMS, then why not explore their solution? But yes, I mean, I do think there are some pretty good solutions as standalone TMS that are getting quite a lot of traction as well within specifically e-commerce and global retail as well. Yeah. I mean, it might also depend on how much a particular company wants to, in a sense, outsource of the process, right? So if you say, okay, I'm going to review my TMSs and I install the TMS and I'm going to manage all my vendors separately, right? So that actually takes quite a strong internal localization function in order to set this up and then also manage it from day to day. There may be companies that can't be bothered and they say, look, just take it off my hands. I want everything out of one vendor, and if that means the same company gives me the technology and also gives me the service, then I'm fine with that. So it's a little lame to say it's on a case by case basis, but I guess in this case it's that holds true. So I don't have any particular preferences there that I would recommend unless I really know the organization and their requirements, right? So you feel that in enterprise and e-commerce, you tend to have very savvy internal localization managers. So maybe that's where they probably go more for the standalone, and then I kind of build my own ecosystem of service providers around it. Again,
they want some level of control, I think, as well. And that's what TMS will give you.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. So total change of subject. We had a major transaction this week. I think it was Wednesday. They announced it, but we actually published the article yesterday because it was late in the US when they announced it after the stock markets closed, and we ran the piece yesterday morning. So a company called AMN Healthcare bought the video interpreting provider Stratus Video in the US for the cool price of $475 million. So
nearly $500 million,
Nearly $500 million. So that puts
tidy sum.
Indeed. So that puts this, I would say, among the top 3 language industry transactions ever. I mean, off the top of my head, the only one I recall that was larger was LanguageLine, which was $1.5 billion, another interpreting company. But that's a bigger price tag than Lionbridge, which was around 360, or even Moravia, which was 320 million. And both of these, I mean, obviously Lionbridge and Moravia both were bigger businesses from a revenue perspective than Stratus Video. So those interpreting companies, remote interpreting companies, are valued more expensively than the, in a sense, more text translation / localization companies. So let me just give you a couple more facts. So Stratus Video, they did about $100 million in revenue in 2019. So the purchase price was roughly 4.5 times their revenue.
Some of that came from their acquisition, I think, or their merger, with InDemand.
I actually removed that already in the 100 million. So 100 million, yes, maybe, yeah, you're right. Some of it came from that. No, you're correct. And about 30 million in profit in EBITDA. So you got almost 14, 15 times EBITDA. For those that are interested in those figures, those are quite high valuations for a company in the language industry. In fact, when they announced AMN, they gave figures that were even higher, or they were higher for revenue and EBITDA, but they used so-called run rates. So they took the fourth quarter figures and just kind of multiplied them up to an annualized level. So that was even a little higher. But yeah, so this AMN Healthcare company, I'm going to have to read this off here. This is they started as a traveling nurse and like healthcare staffing company. They grew very quickly over the past 7, 8, 9 years. They're listed in New York, so listed on the stock exchange. They do about $2.2 billion US dollars in revenue in 2019, and they have a market capitalization of $3 billion. So quite a big company, not a huge company, not like Teleperformance, the one that bought LanguageLine, which is probably times 10 this, but a very large company still. And again, they're in this kind of healthcare staffing, traveling nurses. These are businesses that I don't think we have that much at scale in Europe. That's a very kind of a US-centric business.
It is.
I don't think we have anybody offering this at any big scale here in Switzerland. I'm not sure about the UK, but probably not, because the US healthcare system is obviously very privatized and it's very corporate and it's extremely large. Yeah. So you have these types of businesses.
Well, we're on the other end of the spectrum, though, aren't we? That it's a sort of national health service.
That's right.
They do have people who are recruitment and supply companies who are helping to source nurses and doctors and what have you. Yeah. Like locums as well on an interim basis, but probably not in that kind of scale.
Yeah, we'll learn a lot about it. Seema, who, our writer who's based in Chicago, she's familiar with this and she's working on a story for next week where we kind of unpack the entire transaction, but also the background. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, good.
Again, it is interesting. So that they held an investor call after they announced the transactions a day after, and we listened in. We took notes. I think we have like 10 pages full of notes from this investor call, where the CEO, a person called Suzanne Salka, kind of laid the case. Why did we acquire Stratus Video? What are we trying to do with this company? They mentioned that they said that Stratus Video was a market leader in what they call the high growth segment of the interpreting market, the video remote interpreting. So apparently from the revenue mix in 2019, the video component at Stratus Video was 66%. Over the phone was 23%, and in person was 11%. So really, the remote video is the bulk of the revenue, dominant, which is very different from LanguageLine, which, as far as I understand, is still mostly what they call OPI, over the phone interpreting.
Over the phone, and Cyricom and companies like that, I think, are quite sort of heavily providing over the phone interpreting services compared to anything else.
That's right. They're more over the phone, and they pegged the market size for healthcare interpreting generally at 1.2 billion. So what was our estimate when we published our report in September, Esther?
I think we sized that market at $1.1 billion US dollars.
That's quite close.
Give or take 100 million.
Give or take,
we're in agreement.
Million. So we're in agreement with whoever put together the investment thesis or the M&A package there over at AMN. They said they want to. One of the reasons why they acquired Stratus because they want to expand in what they call digital virtual care. All right,
virtual care. Yep.
Digital virtual care. So maybe
let's unpack that.
I don't know how to unpack that. Maybe you're going to get. You're not only going to get your interpreter remote, but you're also going to get your doctor remote. So.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like the sort of Babylon Health kind of app startup connecting general public to doctors and nurses online or over apps.
That's right. Now they're going to
have
kind of idea. I don't know. We need to look into it. So they're going to have to figure out the emotional side of it, because I guess I wouldn't want to have a negative diagnosis delivered to me by some person on a tablet that they're rolling into the room. I guess even for interpretation, that must be relatively sensitive in many. I mean, maybe you have a normal conversation, an average standard conversation with a video interpreter, but as soon as it gets very sensitive and potentially, a very negative, devastating diagnosis, that, probably difficult to hear that from somebody on an iPad.
Yeah. But, it's a sensitive area, I think, for any kind of interpreter as well. And I suppose it's one of the more challenging, or one of many challenging aspects about working as an interpreter, and particularly within healthcare or public sector, I think, particularly.
Absolutely. That we picked up a couple other interesting bits from the call that I can share. So they said the average rate for video in like general languages is about video interpreting is about $1.50 per minute. So that's an interesting detail we got there. Also, there's a lot of other interesting bits that we're gonna, again, run in an article next week. It's a lot to unpack. It's really a lot. Again, it's 10 pages of transcription, a lot of documents that we'll sift through. But our pro subscribers can dig into that. One thing that we will probably no longer feature Stratus video in our LSPI next year, because one of the analysts questioned the CEO and asked if they will fold, if they break out Stratus as a
that's what I wanted to know. That was my first question as well.
Yeah, so it'll disappear. They said they will be folding it into their bigger healthcare, I think workforce solutions unit. So it'll disappear. Language line kind of disappeared. Who knows? Maybe they'll still participate, but for a publicly listed company to break out results by subunits is very unusual, unless they break it out to their investors as well. So overall, again, a big deal. Another company likely to be kind of going off the radar in terms of revenue figures for us, but very interesting transaction to unpack.
Well, and also from somebody that's outside of the LSP space for once. We don't see a lot of external buyers coming in. Particularly into this industry. There's 2 or 3 a year in the past couple of years. So this is interesting, as you say.
I don't know. Maybe there was the strategy all along, right? Because the Stratus Video it's a very new company. It was actually, when we put together this list of how old are LSPs on our list, I think that's actually, Stratus Video was always by far the youngest company. I think they were founded only in 2011 or 2012, and then, grew very, very quickly based on a very new technology, and then they were backed by private equity, a private equity fund called Kinderhook, exactly. Yeah. So who knows? Maybe that was the play all along. They said, "Hey, here's a niche. Let's get a company started, and then eventually, the plan was always to sell it to one of these health conglomerates." So
sounds like the private equity guys might be very happy anyway.
I think they're very happy this week. Yeah, at this exit, I don't know how much they invested originally, but this seems like a very, very good exit for them. So I guess good for them.
The first of many potentially private equity exits in 2020.
Yeah, we spoke about this last week.
Yeah, right? we did.
Here we are, exiting. Staying with, that's not the public sector, but what's going on in the UK? There was a manifesto by the the ATC, what's it called? The Association
of Translation Companies. Yeah, this is the UK branch of the ATC.
Okay.
That's come up with a manifesto this week, specifically to address challenges and problems that exist in the public sector for interpreting and translation. So interesting document, interesting manifesto. They're setting out some of the main challenges that we're facing, I should say, in the UK at the moment in this sector. So, I mean, looking at things like lack of transparency when it comes to some of the procurement, lack of specific requirements listed in some of the tender documents. I mean, I think those are two things. Also, a general lack of data around the size of the interpreting and translator pool in the UK. It's difficult to map out. We don't know how many people there are. We don't know what the makeup is, what languages are covered by whom, what's their availability. So no real kind of census, I suppose, information around the linguist pool, which they're saying makes it very difficult, obviously, to meet spikes in demand, particularly in the case of rare languages. And yeah,
I was just wondering, what's the main motivator, the main driver for this manifesto, though? I mean, we've had this, we've briefly touched on it last week. So we had all these problems in 2012, 2013 with those big contracts. Yeah. Why now? What's the big current problem they're trying to address here? Did they specify this?
I think it's been bubbling. I mean, it was mentioned that there are challenges, and these are the specific challenges. I mean, I think that's where it's most helpful. I think all of this has been bubbling under the surface for a long time, specifically when it comes to very large sort of national contracts or framework contracts. Definitely at grassroots level, there's a lot of discontent about remuneration, pay rates, equal pay, fair pay for linguists, interpreters. I think although the manifesto is focusing both on translation and interpreting, it definitely sort of has more of a leaning towards addressing some of the specific problems with the interpreting space.
But the ATC is really geared towards representing the companies, right? Mm-hmm. But they also, in a sense, want to be a voice for the linguists and the freelancers, or like.
I think it's the whole ecosystem is how they described it. So, I mean, the ATC is working quite closely on this with some of the main buyers in the UK, so some of the main contracting bodies like the police, who I think were responsible for the ESPO contract, which was like $100 million framework
the Eastern
contract.
Shire thing, huh?
Correct, yeah.
I like when you use that word Shire, as a non-UK resident. Shire, basically, that's Lord of the Rings for me, but...
Fair enough. So I mean that big contract is up for renewal this year. So I think it's kind of it's timely, let's say, to coincide with some of the renewals of the big contracts in the UK. Yes, ATC obviously is there to represent translation companies, but they have quite a broad spectrum of LSPs. So I mean they've got the larger UK companies like the Big Word represented in this committee that they put together to draft the manifesto, but then they also have quite a lot of sort of 2 to 5 million smaller type companies as well in the UK that they're representing, and some of these people, I mean, even the LSPs and translation companies do have they are beholden to linguists as well. They're reliant on linguists and translators and interpreters to do business. So at some level, it is also the translators and linguists' interest is also the LSP's interests. But I mean, they're also working with other associations, I believe, like the CIOL, the NRPSI, and ITI, who are specifically representing linguists in the UK.
Get it. Okay. Well, on that collaborative note, I think we should end it. So happy weekend to everybody, and thanks for this, Esther.
Yeah, happy Brexit Day.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.